If we continue with our kind of mental health for a few generations more, then I think we are at a point where psychologically any productive society would break up and deteriorate. In fact, I want to say one thing. It's one thing whether a person has symptoms and is aware of not being well, and it's quite another thing whether a person has very little of psychic well-being but is not aware of it because he is able to kid himself by all sorts of avenues of escape. And I believe that a great number of so-called normal people, objectively speaking, are more sick than a number of people who consider themselves neurotic because they are aware of their symptoms.
How, in fact, can this be, Dr. Fromm, that a person can be sick and yet feel no effects, have no symptoms of this sickness?
For a very simple reason. In the first place, because everybody else is just as sick. And like in Wells' short story of the land of the blind, people consider normal that which everybody else shares with them. But specifically, our culture offers a great number of avenues of escape. So if people would stay alone by themselves for 3 days without radio and drinking and cigarettes or anything else, we would have hundreds of thousands of nervous breakdowns. But we offer to our population, under the name of fun and pleasure and leisure time consumption and whatnot, we offer such an amount of escapes of avenues of escape that most people forget themselves. In fact, I would say they forget that they are human in a deeper sense.
We're talking here about mental illness, mental health. Let me come right to the point. What do you mean by mental health?
Well, what I mean by mental health, I'm afraid, is different from what many other psychiatrists or psychologists mean by mental health. I don't mean to be unfair, and I certainly don't mean that this is the opinion of all other psychiatrists. I hope there are many who don't share this opinion. But certainly the opinion of many is that mental health is actually the same as adjustment, the same as not being sicker than the average guy, the same as being reduced to the socially current level of unhappiness, not to stick out from the picture of the general run of people. Now, there is another aspect to it. Many people today define mental health actually by the absence of sickness. Sickness, again, defined very often in terms of adjustment, lack of adjustment, or at least in terms of concrete symptoms like insomnia, alcoholism, this, that, and the other. I would define mental health not in terms of absence of sickness, but in a positive sense, of wellness, of well-being.
What does this well-being embrace?
It's a very funny thing. What well-being is very elusive, but you see it when you see it. In fact, you don't have a chance to see it very often, because the people who really show a state of well-being are rare today. I would say you see it, first of all, by the vitality and energy in another person, but not energy of an obsessional kind. By the energy in a person who can be alone with himself, who can be alone with another person without trying to run away. You can see it in the joy of a person, but at the same time in his capacity to be sad when there is a reason to be sad. You can see it in his unending interest and response to people and to things. You can see it in the clarity of his awareness of other people and of situations. You might even eventually measure it in the tonus of their muscles. You might eventually even measure it physiologically, and maybe physiologists would have already measured it if they were more interested in well-being rather than in the absence of sickness.
Can one measure it in terms of a subjective feeling? Is this what, does it involve this essentially?
No, I think like with any other opinions about oneself, most of what people think about their well-being is delusion. There are many people today feel well because they take tranquilizers, or Benzedrine, or this, or that, or a drink, or they have to have fun, or they have to act in some obsessional way. What the statement people make about their own state of well-being or happiness are utterly unreliable.
If this subjective feeling is a poor criterion and illusory and deceptive one, can you give us a positive and accurate criterion? What does it involve?
I would say the intensity and clarity of awareness and response to the world. The lack of egocentricity, and at the same time, the intensity of energy and vitality.
It leads towards a kind of realism then, does it, with regard to the perception of things?
Yes, indeed. I would say one could define well-being also from one angle as a capacity for realism, of experiencing the world and oneself as it is and responding to it.
Let's follow up this lead for a moment. Do you think that American society is a realistic society?
Indeed, I don't think that at all. I think we are probably one of the most unrealistic societies which have ever lived under the sun.
Now, in what respects?
Well, we kid ourselves about love, we kid ourselves about our aims, we kid ourselves about our individuality, when actually we are conforming all the time. But I could give, and I want to give, a much more decisive and important example, and that is our attitude toward the threat of the self-destruction of the whole world. We sit here, we know that there is a good chance that not only this country, but our whole civilization, all we stand for, our children and grandchildren will be destroyed, completely destroyed by an atomic war. And yet we talk glibly about it. We have signs for shelter in cities in which we know there will be no shelter if a hydrogen bomb falls on them. We talk about all sorts of measures. We talk about victorious war. We talk glibly about if war comes then, without an awareness, except merely intellectually, that if war comes, this is the end of all of us. And for a whole society, and this is not only America, this is practically the whole world, if you would find one person in New York City or any other big city who plays around with a bomb which could kill only thousands of people, and there's a 50-50 chance that it might go off, and he would say, well, I'm just trying it out, and well, if the people get killed, it's just too bad, I would regret it, but it might be necessary. You know very well where this man would land. While practically our whole population behaves in the same manner, everybody knows the possibility of the suicide of the human race, and only very few people are truly aware of it. If that is not lack of realism, I don't know what it is.
You have spoken of this lack of realism as one thing in our society working against mental health. Are there other things?
Yes, Mr. Smith, I would say practically everything. Our culture is concerned primarily with production and consumption of things. And in this process of being primarily concerned with things, their ever-increasing production, their ever-increasing consumption, we ourselves transform ourselves into things without knowing it. We lose our individuality in spite of the fact that we talk a lot about it. We follow leaders who don't lead. We believe that we are acting on our own impulses and convictions and opinions when actually we are manipulated by a whole industry, by slogans, and yet nobody has any true aim. We are alienated from ourselves. We don't feel much, certainly we don't feel intensely. All we are after is not to be different, and we are frightened to death to be just 2 feet away from the herd. And yet we are deceiving ourselves about this reality by talking all the time in terms of our traditional heritage, of the Judeo-Christian tradition, of humanistic philosophy, of individuality, and whatnot.
What is the role of the mental health movement and psychiatry in this situation? Are they helping?
Well, I would hope they did, but I'm not so convinced. I'm sure some help, and some want to help. But I'm afraid there is a great danger also in the mental health movement today, as there is in psychiatry, psychoanalysis, and psychology. I'm afraid the role of the mental health movement and the role of psychology and psychiatry are to help to adjust man somewhat more, to make him function more smoothly. You might say psychology and mental health today is in danger, and psychologists are in danger to become the priests of industrial system. That is to say, to help people adjust to a system where they are supposed to produce and to consume in masses, in groups, directed by central organization and slogans, and yet at the same time not to be aware. They are dissatisfied with that. They suffer from it. They suffer from what the French already called in the 18th century la maladie du siècle, the illness of the century, from boredom, from the meaninglessness of life. Now, there is a danger in that they might get sick, that they might have manifest symptoms, that they might protest, that they might want to make life more meaningful. And then many psychologists come and say, you shouldn't be dissatisfied. If you are dissatisfied, that means you're neurotic. And we'll adjust you so that you accept a meaningless life without rebelling against it, without symptoms, and you will have a nice funeral anyway.
Usually, Dr. Fromm, we reserve the word insane for individuals. Do you think it's possible that some societies might be insane?
But if we mean by sane, insane, a lack of sanity, then indeed I think whole societies can be insane, and many societies have been insane, and I'm afraid we are on the way to it too unless some drastic changes occur. But I have to add one remark here. There are 2 concepts of sanity. A society can be sane in the sense that people adjust themselves to it and to its norms. But it can be insane in the universal sense of what is good for man as he exists. In fact, all the great norms, whether you take the 10 Commandments or the teachings of Buddha or the teaching of Christ, are norms of human sanity, which refer to human existence, to mankind, and they are all based on the idea also that the loyalty to man and the values in man are higher than the loyalties to any given societies and the values represented by it.
Dr. Fromm, is it possible for a man to remain sane in today's world?
Yes, indeed, I think it is. And certainly men like Dr. Schweitzer are a wonderful example that it is possible. Now, most of us are not Schweitzers. In fact, this is very rare to have the genius of a man like Schweitzer. But I think it is possible if one tries, in the first place, to see that certain disappointments, a certain sense of isolation is a necessary consequence of remaining sane in a world in which there is so little sanity. And secondly, if one overcomes the sense of isolation by a deep sense of solidarity and oneness with all those men who have lived on the earth and who have been sane. Dr. Schweitzer would be one of them, but many of the great philosophers and religious leaders and great spiritual leaders of the human race, whether that's Socrates or Buddha or any other, have been sane. And there are even a few people today, quite a few, who are sane and who at least are willing to be sane. What matters is to have the courage to see reality, to speak out, and to feel identified with that part of humanity, whether it's today or in the past, who had one outstanding quality, that of being realist in the sense I have been talking about, of seeing the truth and at the same time of not despairing.
What, Dr. Fromm, do you see as the prospects for the future?
I see only one terrific danger, and that is that of a war in which would end with the extinction of the human race of civilization, or at best, if one could call it that way, with universal fascism, whoever wins. And for me, therefore, the question of avoidance of war is the one overriding ethical question which men are confronted with today. If we avoid it, I am very hopeful about the future, because I think man has developed to a degree of rationality and of knowledge and of insight, which, if he overcomes his one-sided concentration on production of things, will then lead him to a culture with a depth of satisfaction which we have never had on earth.